Long ago, before the world was softened by warmth and light, there was only the deep silence of winter. In the farthest reaches of the north, where the sun disappeared for months and the horizon seemed endless, there lived a people whose lives were woven with frost and shadow. Their name has been lost to time, even their language has vanished. Only the wind remembers them now. Whispering through the tall, dark pines, it carries fragments of their story across the snow, as soft as breath, as fleeting as a dream. They lived beneath a sky that rarely knew color. By day, the light was pale and thin, like the last glow of a dying candle. By night, the moon hung heavy and silver, stretching the trees into long black figures that seemed alive. Snow fell quietly, endlessly, burying their wooden homes so deeply that only faint, rounded roofs peeked through the drifts. Each home was like a small cave of warmth amid the cold, a fragile flame surrounded by the vast frozen dark. When they stepped outside, their breath turned instantly to mist, curling into the still air before vanishing. Legends say they walked like shadows through the pine forests. Their movements were slow, deliberate, silent. They did not disturb the snow, unless they had to. They followed paths that only they knew, winding between trees that stood as still as sentinels. At times they stopped to listen to the creak of ice on the branches, to the faint cracking sounds beneath the frozen earth, like distant drums. These sounds were not just noises to them, they were messages, signs from something older than themselves. The tribe believed that the world spoke in these soft, hidden ways, and those who listened closely could hear the voices of the spirits. The spirits, they said, were older than the sky. They lived in the wind that swept down from the mountains, in the frozen rivers that wound like silver snakes through the valleys. At night, when the wind rose and whistled through the trees, the tribe gathered in silence to listen. They believed the wind carried warnings or perhaps blessings from those who came before. Children would lie close to their mothers, feeling the vibrations of the cold air against their skin, imagining the words hidden in that ghostly song. Few outsiders ever dared to enter these lands. To those who lived beyond the mountains, the north was not a place, but a trial. The cold seemed alive there, moving like a hunter, creeping into bones and hollowing out strength. Travelers told stories of how the frost bit like a blade, and the snow seemed endless, swallowing whole paths in a single night. They spoke of how the silence was not peaceful, but heavy, pressing against the mind until it became unbearable. And still, within this place, the forgotten tribe endured. They endured because they had no choice. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of winter. The cold shaped their bones, their thoughts, their ways. Each step outside was taken with care, each breath measured. They wore thick furs sewn with sinew, layers upon layers that kept them just warm enough to move. Their hands were rough and strong, shaped by carving wood and bone in the dim light of their homes. In those homes, small fires glowed soft. The smoke curled upward into the cracks of the roofs, vanishing into the snow. Around the fire, they sat close, their faces half lit, their eyes reflecting the flames like tiny stars. They spoke little, words were rare, like precious stone. When they did speak, it was in quiet voices, slow and thoughtful. They did not waste speech on things that did not matter, only what was necessary, only what was true. When the nights grew longest and the sky forgot the sun, the tribe relied on the moon. Its pale glow was their guide, their companion. They believed the moon was a great watchful spirit that walked above the earth, keeping them safe in the endless dark. On clear nights they left offerings for it in the snow, small carvings of bone, braided strands of hair, bits of dried herb. They placed these gifts at the edge of the forest, where the trees began to gather like an audience, and then they stepped back into the shadows, waiting silently as the moonlight touched the offerings. Sometimes the offerings vanished by morning, sometimes they remained, covered in a thin dusting of new snow. The tribe did not question which gifts were taken, and which were left behind. To them, it was simply the will of the spirits, unknowable but always present. The forests were their lifeblood. Beneath the pines, they found what little the earth still gave in winter: fallen branches for fire, hidden roots buried under frozen soil. The forests were also where they felt the closest to the unseen. Shadows moved differently there. The air seemed heavier. At times they saw shapes between the trees, tall, still figures that disappeared if one blinked too long. They called these shapes the Watchers, silent beings who guarded the boundary between the living and the dead. At the edge of their settlement stood great stones, older than memory. These stones were carved with deep runes, symbols no one could fully read anymore. They believed the stones held the voices of their ancestors, frozen in the rock, like echoes. In the pale light of the moon, the carvings glowed faintly, as if lit from within. On certain nights the tribe gathered before them in silence, laying their hands on the cold surface. They would close their eyes and listen, not with their ears, but with something deeper, a quiet feeling that could not be put into words. And always the cold tested. It slipped through their furs, pressed against their skin, bit at their fingers until they went numb. It took those who were weak or those who wandered too far from the fire. Each winter, they buried some of their own beneath the snow, their bodies wrapped in layers of cloth and placed on sleds to be taken to the stone circle. There they left them, believing the ice itself would carry their spirits into the mountains, where the ancestors lived. Still, the tribe did not despair. Their lives were hard, but they did not see them as cruel. To them, the winter was not an enemy, but a teacher. It taught them patience, quiet strength, and the value of each breath. It reminded them that nothing in life could be taken for granted. Not warmth, not food, not even the soft glow of a single flame. And so they endured, through endless nights and silent days, through the weight of snow and the sharpness of wind. They lived. Their lives were slow, deliberate, tied to the rhythm of the earth. They asked for nothing more than survival, and in that survival, they found meaning. Now, their voices are gone. Their homes are buried beneath centuries of snow. The forests have grown thicker. The stones stand alone. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind rises and sweeps through the trees, it carries a faint whisper, a sound like breath, a memory, a reminder that once, in the far reaches of the north, a forgotten people carved their lives from silence and frost and became one with the endless winter. Long ago, before time was measured in days and seasons, there was a night that did not end. It crept over the mountains like a tide of shadow, swallowing the light and leaving only a dim glow behind. The people of the frozen north called it the first night without dawn. It came without warning, without mercy. The sun slipped beyond the jagged peaks and never returned. The sky became pale and strange, like a memory of daylight rather than the thing itself. And in that endless twilight, the world grew quiet, heavy, and cold. The tribe gathered in their wooden halls, huddled close to the small flames they kept alive with careful hands. Outside, the land lay in silence, except for the sighing of the wind. The snow reflected what little light there was, turning the world into a vast silver emptiness. The trees stood dark and still, like sentinels carved from ice, and beyond them stretched the white plains, endless and bare, where no footsteps dared to wander. Inside, the fire was their only companion. It flickered softly on the walls, making shadows dance in slow, gentle movement. The children sat wrapped in furs, their faces glowing faintly in the firelight. Their elders spoke to them in calm, low voices, telling stories of a time before the ice ruled the land. They spoke of green fields where flowers bent in the wind, of rivers that ran free and unfrozen, of skies that burned with gold and orange when the sun fell toward the horizon. To the children, these things sounded like dreams. They had never seen such colors, never felt such warmth, but they listened, eyes wide, imagining a world beyond the snow. Outside, the wind began to howl, sharp and long, like the cry of a hungry wolf. It rattled the wooden walls and swept through the cracks in the door, bringing with it the scent of ice. The people listened, but did not tremble. The wind was always there. It was older than their memories, older than their tribe. To them, it was not an enemy, but a voice, a warning, a reminder. The wind carried the will of the gods, or so they believed. When it grew louder, they said it was the gods testing their heart. When it grew still, they said the gods were watching. The long night tested everything. It tested the strength of the body, the patience of the spirit, and the closeness of their bonds. Food became scarce, and they learned to eat little. They rationed dried fish and frozen roots, chewing slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. Hunger became a quiet ache they carried without complaint. It was part of the test, part of the trial that shaped who they were. They slept lightly, waking often, unsure if hours or days had passed. Time lost its meaning when there was no sun, no shadow to mark its path. The endless twilight made each moment feel like it was caught between dreaming and waking. They moved slowly, speaking only when needed, conserving not only their strength, but their words. Silence became their companion, but fear and wonder lived side by side in their hearts. Fear, because the dark was endless, and they could not know if it would ever live. Wonder, because the dark held secrets they could almost feel, but not fully see. Sometimes, when they looked into the pale sky, they thought they saw shapes, soft shifting forms that moved behind the cloud. Sometimes when the wind fell still, they felt the air hum, as if the world itself was breathing with them. The elders told the children this night was not a curse, it was a test from the gods, a gift of patience and strength. They said the gods hid the sun to see who among them could endure without despair. To wait, they said, was the purest form of faith. To wait without fear was to show that you trusted not yourself, but the line of ancestors behind you. So they waited, they breathed slowly, and they trusted. Each family carried with them a small wooden charm, carved in the shape of an animal, or a tree. These charms were said to hold the memory of their ancestors. At night, when the wind was loud and the hunger sharp, they would hold these charms in their hands and feel a quiet calm wash over them. The wood was smooth and warm from generations of touch. It reminded them they were not alone, that others had survived nights just like this. And slowly, the fear softened. The darkness became familiar, almost comforting in its stillness. They began to notice its beauty. The way the frost shimmered like tiny stars on the windows, the way the snow outside glowed faintly beneath the strange half-light, the way the firelight painted golden halos on the faces of those they loved. Sometimes when the wind paused, they stepped outside for a moment. The air was so cold it burned their lungs, but they stood still and looked up. Above them stretched a sky unlike any they had seen before. It was vast and deep, filled with shimmering bands of light that rippled like soft curtains across the stars. The elders told them these were the paths of the gods, moving silently through the heavens. They watched until their bodies trembled from the cold, then returned to the warmth of the hall, carrying that silent beauty with them. And so they endured. Day after day or night after night, there was no difference anymore. They endured the hunger, the cold, the silence. They endured the endless darkness, not with anger, but with quiet strength. They believed the sun would return when it was meant to, and until then they would live in the rhythm of the gods, trusting that this was part of the great design of the world. When at last the elders felt the time was near, they told the children that the darkness always ends. No night lasts forever. Even the longest winter must give way to spring. And in that soft promise, the tribe found peace. They knew that patience was not weakness, but power, that waiting was not empty but full of meaning. And though that first night without dawn seemed endless, they did not lose themselves to despair. They held on to their stories, they held on to their fire, they held on to each other. Now the long night has passed into legend. No one remembers the exact days, or the exact cold, but the feeling remains, a memory carried on the wind. It tells us that even in the deepest darkness, there is still quiet strength. There is still the soft glow of hope. And when we wait with calm hearts, the sun will return, as it always has, as it always will. Long ago, before the names of tribes were written or remembered, there was a place where the snow never melted. It lay in the farthest reaches of the north, where the wind was sharp as a blade, and the mountains rose like frozen teeth against the pale sky. There, among the silence and the endless white, a people lived in quiet endurance. Their homes were small circles of warmth in a sea of ice, but around those homes stood something older, something deeper. Towering stones, tall as trees, carved with runes no tongue could speak, no mind could truly read. These were not mere markers, they were the spirits of the ice. The people believed the stones were alive in a way no living thing was. They said the stones listened, they remembered, they watched. When the wind blew through their cracks, it made a low hum, like a voice speaking from another age. And when the moonlight touched their surfaces, the runes seemed to shift ever so slightly, catching shadows that danced in patterns too strange for human eyes to follow. On quiet nights, when the fire burned low and the tribe sat together in silence, the elders spoke of the one who lived beyond the mountains. They did not give it a name, for names were too small to hold such a thing. It was not a god, but not a beast either. It was something in between, something beyond both. They said its breath made the storms, its silence made the cold, and its shadow fell across the land in winter's longest nights. When the blizzards roared, they believed it was moving, stirring in the depths of its hidden domain. To live in the north was to live under its gaze, so the tribe honored it, not with loud prayers or grand temples, but with quiet gestures. At the base of the stones they left offerings, small carved charms made from bone shaped into birds, wolves and strange creatures half remembered from dream and story. They pressed these charms gently into the snow, whispering only a single breath of thanks, and then returned to their halls without looking back. It was not fear that guided these rituals, but a respect for the vastness of the world, for the power that could not be seen but was always felt. When a child was born, they would carry the newborn to the stones, cradled in soft furs. The elders would lift the child toward the towering runes, and let the wind pass over its small face. See the spirits, they would murmur, and let them see you, for they believed that life was a fragile thing, and only by showing the spirits their humility could a life take root and survive the winter. The stones stood in a wide circle, half buried in the snow, their surfaces slick with frost. No two stones were the same. Some were smooth and pale as ice itself. Others were black and jagged, as if torn from the mountain's heart. The runes upon them were deep and strange. Even the elders, who knew the old ways best, admitted they could not read them fully. They are older than our words, they said, older than our memory. And yet, the people did not need to understand the symbols to feel their meaning. When they stood before the stones, they felt a presence, soft, heavy, endless. It was like standing at the edge of a vast ocean at night, knowing it stretched farther than any eye could see. It humbled them. It made them feel small but not in despair. It made them feel part of something larger, something eternal. In the deep winters, when the wind howled like a living thing and the sky seemed frozen in place, the tribe would gather by the fire and tell the old story. It was the story of the first winter, the winter that never ended, when the world was new and still unfinished. Back then, they said, the being from the mountains walked the earth. It moved slowly with steps that cracked the ice and shook the ground. Its breath covered the valleys with snow. But it was not cruel. It was simply the way of things. It brought silence so that people would learn to listen. It brought hunger so that people would learn to share. In those days, the story went, the people did not know how to live in the cold. Many perished, but one small group listened. They followed the wind, watched the sky, and began to understand the rhythm of winter. They built their first stones to honor the great presence, and when they did, the storms calmed, the blizzards softened, the being returned to the mountains, and watched from afar, letting the tribe live. From then on, the stones remained as guardians, silent but strong, marking the bond between the people and the spirit of the ice. Even now, the people still carried that bond. They treated the land with care, never taking more than they needed. When they hunted, they left a small part of the catch beneath the stones. When they gathered firewood, they placed the first piece in the snow before the runes. It was a quiet way of saying, we remember, we honor, we live because of you. Sometimes in the still hours before dawn, a faint blue light would shimmer along the carvings. The tribe would gather and watch without speaking. It was said to be the spirit's answer, a sign that their offerings had been received. And on those nights the winds would fall silent for a time, as if the great presence itself was listening back. The stones became more than just guardians. They were a place to seek comfort when fear crept in. When someone was sick or lost, their family would go to the stones and press their hands to the cold surface, whispering their hopes. And though the stones did not speak, the people felt calmer when they left. It was enough. No scholar has ever understood those runes, and perhaps no one ever will. But the tribe did not need scholars. They did not seek to solve the mystery. For them, the mystery was the meaning. It was enough to know that there were forces beyond their knowing, forces that watched, forces that protected. And so through the harshest winters, when entire villages elsewhere vanished beneath snow and famine, this tribe endured. They endured because they believed. They endured because they remembered their place in the great silent rhythm of the north. Now the stones still stand, though the people are long gone. The wind still moves through their cracks, humming the same low song it has always sung. And when the moonlight falls just right, the runes seem to shift again, as if still alive, still waiting, still remembering. If you were to stand there now in the endless quiet of the frozen land, you might feel it too, the weight of the mountains, the whisper of something older than time, the presence that is neither god nor beast, but something greater, carved into the ice, watching, waiting, holding the memory of a people who once lived in harmony with the cold. And in that silence you might understand why they left their bone charms, why they spoke softly to the snow, and why they trusted what could never truly be seen. Long ago, in a land where winter swallowed the earth whole, there came a season of hunger, so deep it felt like silence itself had teeth. The snow was endless then, heavy and pale, covering every path and shadow. The forests, once alive with soft rustlings and quiet life, grew hollow and still. No paw prints touched the frozen ground, no wings stirred in the white air. Even the strongest hunters returned with nothing but frost on their faces and sorrow in their eyes. The animals had gone deep beneath the earth, hidden where no spear or trap could reach, and the sea, that vast mirror of life, lay locked beneath an unbroken sheet of ice, so thick it seemed eternal. In that season, hunger became more than an emptiness in the belly. It was a presence, quiet and patient, waiting in every corner of their wooden hall. It crept into their dreams, soft at first, like a whisper. It coiled around their thoughts during the long nights, when even the moon hid behind clouds. It was not loud, not violent. It was slow, steady, a shadow following them from dusk to dawn. The tribe knew this time well. Each year it came, testing them, and each year they prepared as best they could. They rationed what little food they had, stretching dried fish and pale, bitter roots into meals so small they barely counted as meals at all. They chewed slowly, as if each bite was sacred, as if savoring it could make it last longer. Sometimes they boiled the same bones twice, drawing the faintest flavor from them, until there was nothing left but clear water. The children, who once filled the air with bright voices, grew quiet. Their laughter faded into weak whispers, like the flutter of dying embers. Their cheeks hollowed. Their eyes, wide and watchful, followed every movement of the adults, hoping for more, but knowing there was none. The adults hid their own hunger behind calm faces, though the ache gnawed at them just as fiercely. They smiled when they could, not because they felt joy, but because they needed the children to believe there was still hope. Yet even in the depth of that famine, the tribe endured. They invented small rituals of resilience to hold themselves together. They shared stories instead of meals. At night, by the dim light of the fire, they spoke of better times, not to mourn what was lost, but to remind themselves that the world could be kind again. They told tales of green fields that would one day return, of rivers that would run free when the ice melted, of animals that would come back to the forests when the earth woke from its long sleep. They sang soft songs, slow and low, their voices weaving together like threads in a fragile cloth. The songs were old, older than any of them could remember. They spoke of endurance, of patience, of the bond between all who shared the same hardship. Sometimes the songs were no more than hums, wordless and gentle, like a lullaby meant to soothe the earth itself. In those moments the hunger faded for a little while, replaced by the quiet comfort of knowing they were not alone. The fire became more than warmth. It was life itself. They tended it carefully, feeding it scraps of wood, small branches gathered from beneath the snow. Around it they sat close, sharing not food but presence. They leaned into one another, shoulder to shoulder, drawing what strength they could from human closeness. It was not enough to fill the body, but it was enough to keep the spirit alive. Outside, the wind moaned through the gaps in the wooden walls. It sounded almost like a voice, long and mournful, carrying the weight of countless winters. Sometimes it roared, fierce and sharp, shaking the doors on their hinges. Other times it softened into a whisper, a faint sigh across the snow. The tribe listened to it the way one listens to an old friend, knowing it could not be stopped, only endured. They said the wind was the breath of the mountains, and in its song was the promise that even this harsh season would one day pass. When the hunger grew too sharp to bear, they turned their minds inward. They dreamed of spring. They imagined the feel of soft grass beneath bare feet, the taste of sweet berries, the sound of rushing streams. They painted those dreams in their minds as clearly as they could, holding them like treasures. In this way, they fed their hearts, even when their stomachs were empty. There were no grand speeches, no loud displays of courage. Their strength was quiet. It was in the small acts, a parent giving their portion to a child without a word, a neighbor sharing the last of their roots even when they themselves were starving, an elder offering a story to distract from the ache. These acts were like threads, fragile but strong, weaving a net that caught them all and kept them from falling into despair. They knew the cold would not last forever. The elders, their faces lined like the bark of old trees, reminded them often. They spoke of the cycles of the earth, how even the deepest winter was followed by the soft thaw of spring. They told the young ones that suffering was not endless, that it came like a tide and would recede in time. And though the children were too young to truly believe, they listened, and the words sank into them like faint light through clouds. Even as their bodies weakened, their bond grew stronger. They were not just individuals enduring hunger. They were one, bound by a shared will to survive. It was not food alone that kept them alive. It was that thread of humanity, invisible but unbroken, that tied them together through the famine of frost. And so they waited, day after day, Night after endless night, they waited with quiet heart. They did not rage against the cold, for they knew it could not be fought. They did not weep for what they lacked, for tears could not warm the body or fill the belly. Instead, they trusted in the strength that comes from enduring together. When the first small signs of change came, a faint drip of water from an icicle, the soft cracking of the ice on the sea, they did not cheer, they simply nodded to one another, a silent acknowledgement that the tide of hunger was turning. The earth was waking again. Life would return. Now, when the wind howls across those same frozen lands, it carries the memory of their patience. It whispers their quiet songs, their soft strength, their silent rituals of survival. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear them still, voices rising in the dark, sharing warmth even when the bowls were empty, holding on to hope like a faint but steady flame. Long ago, in the farthest reaches of the north, there were winters so deep they seemed without end. The sky turned pale and hollow, the mountains vanished behind walls of white, and the wind became a living thing. It howled like a restless spirit, clawing at the wooden halls of the tribe. The storms did not merely pass through, they stayed, circling the land with a patience that felt eternal. And when the winds grew too fierce, when even the strongest among them could no longer move through the snow, the tribe surrendered not in fear, but in quiet wisdom. They retreated into their great communal hall, a long, low place of wood and stone, half buried in the earth. There the air was heavy with the faint scent of smoke and old pine. They lay together on thick furs side by side, letting their bodies grow still. Outside, the storms roared with the fury of unseen gods, but within those walls there was only a slow, deep silence. This was not ordinary sleep. It was something deeper, something older. The elders taught them how to enter this strange winter trance. Breathe shallow, they whispered. Slow your heart, let the body rest, and let the mind wander to softer places. And so they did. They let their thoughts drift to memories of warmth, of sunlight on green moss, of rivers running free. They dreamed of firelight that did not flicker and of winds that smelled of blooming earth, rather than ice. As they surrendered to this trance, time seemed to fade away. Hours, days, perhaps even weeks passed, but to those who rested it felt like a single long moment suspended in stillness. It was not hibernation, not truly sleep, but something between waking and dreaming. Their breathing became soft and slow, almost soundless. The youngest children nestled close to their parents, their tiny chests rising and falling in unison. The elders sat at the edges of the hall, their eyes half closed, listening for things no one else could hear. For in those silent nights, when the storms raged above and the hall sank into darkness, they claimed to hear whispers. The whispers were faint, softer than the sigh of snow falling against the roof. They were voices from long ago, voices of ancestors whose names had been lost to time. The tribe believed these voices came to guide them, to tell them when the danger above had passed, when it was safe to rise and breathe the open air again. Sometimes the whispers came as words, other times they came as feelings, an easing of the heart, a sense of peace that meant the storm was waning. The people trusted these whispers. They had no reason not to, for as long as the tribe could remember, the ancestors had never led them astray.
Above them, the world was wild. The storms tore through the forests, stripping the branches bare. The snow piled higher than a man could stand. The winds swept across the sea, freezing it solid, sealing every wave in glassy silence. Vikings in their long ships battled such elements, fighting against the weight of ice and wind. But this forgotten tribe did not fight. They had learned to become one with the storms. They knew that to resist was to lose, so they gave themselves to stillness. In the trance, time changed. They saw dreams that felt like memories, faces of those who came before, standing in soft light, visions of summers that had passed long ago, when the land was green and alive. In this half-dreaming, they felt closer to the truth of things, closer to the great rhythm of the earth. Hunger faded, fear faded, and only the quiet remained. Sometimes in this strange sleep, they heard the mountains breathing. It was a deep, distant sound, like the earth itself was alive. The elders would speak of this after they woke, saying it was the spirit of the land, reminding them that all things moved in cycles. Storms would rage, but they would also end. Winter would hold the earth for a time, but spring would always come again. The hall itself became like a living heart. The fire at its center burned low, just enough to keep the cold from creeping too close. Shadows swayed gently on the walls, shaped by the dim glow. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, all was slow. The people rested,
conserving every flicker of strength. In their stillness, they found survival. When the whispers shifted, when the elders felt the change in the air, even through the walls, they knew it was time. Slowly they stirred, the trance lifted. The children blinked awake, their small voices soft and confused at first. The hunters rose, stretching stiff limbs. They listened carefully, no longer to the whispers, but to the silence beyond the walls. The wind had quieted, the storm had passed. They opened the doors and stepped outside, their breath rising in pale cloud. The snow was deep, reshaping the land into soft hills and curves. The sky above was still grey, but lighter now, with a faint glow along the edges of the horizon. The tribe stood together, blinking in the dim light, feeling the world shift back into motion. They did not speak at first. They simply stood, breathing the cold air, grateful to have endured. And then life began again. They dug paths through the snow. They cleared the roofs. They checked their stores, gathered wood, and set the fire high. The trance was over, but the lesson remained. It was not strength alone that carried them through the harshest times. It was their willingness to wait, to trust, to become part of the stillness, rather than fight against it. Now, when the winds rise in that far land, the echoes of their trance remain. If you stand in the ruins of that old hall, half buried beneath centuries of snow, you can almost feel it, the hush of breath slowing, the faint warmth of furs piled close, the whispers of voices that belong to no living soul. The storms still come and go as they always have, and perhaps the tribe is still there in some way, resting in the silence, dreaming of warmth, waiting for the soft moment when the world calls them to rise again. Long ago, before the world was softened by time, there was a land swallowed by endless winter. The sky was a pale, hollow thing, and the snow stretched forever, heavy and still. The cold was not just in the air, it was in the bones of the mountains, in the frozen rivers, in the silence that pressed down on every living soul. In that darkness, the tribe built their refuge, a single hall of wood and stone, buried deep into the earth, where one thing always remained alive: the fire. It was no ordinary flame, it was small, fragile, but it was constant. It was the first thing they saw when they woke from their winter trance, and the last thing they looked upon before surrendering to sleep. It was the center of their world, the one thing that kept the void beyond their walls from creeping inside. They called it their tiny sun, for it burned when the true sun had vanished from the sky. They tended it with care, feeding it scraps of wood, dried moss, even slivers of bone when nothing else remained. The fire was not just warmth, it was hope, it was memory, it was life itself. Around this fire, they gathered close. The hall was dim, shadows flickering like soft ghosts along the walls, but the flame lit their faces in gentle gold. It reminded them that even in the heart of darkness, there could still be light. They whispered prayers as they worked, voices soft, words slow and careful. They crafted tools from bone and horn, shaping the remnants of past hunts into what they would need to endure the days ahead. Each stroke of a knife on bone was deliberate, a quiet promise that they would survive long enough to use what they made. The women stitched hides into cloaks and blankets, their fingers moving steadily even when numb with cold. They sewed in silence, but the silence was not empty. It was full of thought, of memory, of presence. As they worked, they thought of the animals that had given them those hides, the great stags of the forest, the wolves who prowled the edges of their settlement, the bears that once slept in caves beneath the snow. The beasts were gone now, hidden too deep to be found in the dead of winter, but their warmth remained, a gift passed on. The children sat near the fire, wrapped in furs, their small hands reaching out to feel the heat. They watched the flames dance and twist, their eyes wide with a kind of wonder that even hunger could not dim. To them, the fire was alive. It was a storyteller, a guardian, a soft golden friend that never left. Sometimes the elders would speak in low voices, telling the children stories of when the sky was bright and the earth was green. But even when no one spoke, the fire itself seemed to tell a story, crackling and shifting, whispering secrets in a language no one could quite understand. Outside, the world was silent. The snow lay heavy and unmoving, the sky a dull, endless grey. No birds called, no animals stirred, even the wind seemed to have paused, holding its breath. Beyond the walls of the hall was nothing but the cold void, a place where no human could survive for long. And yet inside, the fire created a different world, a small glowing world. It was enough to remind them that darkness could be kept at bay, but only if tended carefully. They knew the fire would not last if forgotten. It was like life itself, fragile, demanding care, needing to be fed, and so they tended it in shifts.
one by one. No hour passed without someone sitting awake beside it, adding wood, stirring the embers, breathing gently to keep it alive. To let it die would be to let despair inside, and despair once inside could not be so easily removed. The elders said the fire was not just flame, it was a promise. It promised that morning would return, even if no one remembered what dawn looked like. It promised that the ice would someday melt, that the rivers would wake and run again, that the green would return to the earth. Even if the mind could no longer imagine those things clearly, the fire held the memory for them. Its warmth was a reminder of the sun that had once filled their days. Sometimes late at night, when most of the tribe had drifted into shallow sleep, someone would sit alone by the fire. They would stare into the glowing embers, watching the colors shift from orange to red, to faint blue. And in those moments when the hall was quiet and the flames soft, they swore they could see shapes within the fire. Faces of those who were gone, eyes looking back from the other side of time. It was said the ancestors lived in the firelight, reaching through the flames to watch over the living. Whether it was true or only the dream of hungry minds, no one knew, but it gave them comfort. And so the fire became their link to everything they could not see, to the seasons that had passed, to the people who had come before, to the sun hidden but not gone. It tied them to the cycle of the earth, to the rhythm of survival that carried on even in the bleakest of winters. As the storms passed and the nights stretched on, the fire never went out. It flickered when the wood grew thin. It dimmed when the hall grew too cold. But always, someone's hands reached out to save it, and always it came back. In that small hall with darkness pressing on every side, they created their own dawn, one flicker at a time. The tribe knew the fire would not end the winter. It could not stop the cold or fill their empty bowl, but it reminded them they were still human, that they still belonged to one another. That even when the void was vast and silent, there was a place where warmth lived. It reminded them that no darkness is endless, no storm eternal. And when the first faint glow of true morning returned, when the pale sun finally rose above the mountains after many long moons, it found the fire still burning. The tribe stepped outside, blinking into the light. They were thin, tired, quiet, but alive. Behind them, in the hall, the tiny sun still glowed, a patient witness to their endurance. Now, if you wander to those forgotten lands and find the ruins of their hall, you might still feel it. The faint warmth that lingers even in stone, the soft hum of memory, the echo of a fire that once stood against the void, keeping the promise of morning alive when no one else could. Long ago, in the land where the winter never truly ended, there was a secret beneath the ice. It lay hidden under the frozen earth, deeper than the frost could claim, older than the memory of any living soul. The tribe who lived there knew this secret well. It was their quiet salvation, their hidden strength when the world above turned hollow with snow and silence. The outsiders who sometimes wandered close to their lands never understood. They saw only the bleakness, the endless cold that stole life from everything it touched. They believed no one could live there for long, but the tribe had learned to speak the language of winter. They knew where to find what others could not see. Beneath the heavy crust of ice and snow, they had carved chambers into the earth, silent places, sealed with care, untouched by the storms that raged above. These were the places of the hidden feast. It was no feast of joy or celebration. It was not rich or sweet. It was sour, strange, a taste that outsiders would have spat upon the ground. But to the tribe it was sacred. In the long days when no fresh food could be found, when the hunters returned empty-handed and the forest gave no gifts, these secret stores kept them alive. They buried fish in the frozen soil at the first hint of winter. The fish were packed with herbs and roots, wrapped in hides, and lowered into deep pits. There they rested, hidden beneath layers of snow fermenting slowly as the months passed. Roots gathered in the last days of autumn were preserved in bundles, placed in the same cold chambers. To outsiders, this would have seemed strange, even foul, but the tribe understood the rhythm of time and earth. The food would change, yes, but it would not die. It would wait, sleeping like the land itself, until the time came to awaken it. When the hunger was sharpest, when the last of the fresh stores were gone, and the people's eyes grew dim with need, they would make the journey to the hidden chambers. It was not a journey taken lightly. They moved in silence, their feet soft against the snow. The elders led the way, carrying torches that flickered weakly in the wind. When they reached the site, they brushed away the snow, revealing the dark entrance in the ground. It always felt like opening a doorway into another world. The air inside was still and heavy,
rich with the strange smell of the buried food. To some, it might have smelled of rot, but to the tribe it smelled of survival. They lifted out the bundles with reverence, as though unwrapping an ancient treasure. And in a way it was a treasure, one born of patience, of memory, of knowledge passed down through countless winters. Back in the safety of their hall, they would gather around the fire and share the hidden feast. The taste was sharp, sour, and unlike anything it was not the taste of abundance, but the taste of endurance. Every bite reminded them that they had prepared well, that their ancestors had taught them wisely. It was food born not from plenty, but from understanding the deep rhythm of the land. The Vikings who ventured north sometimes spoke of this practice with awe and disgust. They could not imagine how such foods could sustain life. They could not see the wisdom in it, but the tribe did not care for their judgment. They knew that survival was not about pride. It was about knowing the earth, about listening to what it whispered in the quiet of autumn, about trusting that even in decay there was life waiting to be found. These hidden chambers were more than storage. They were a reminder of the bond between the tribe and the land. They believed the earth held them in its frozen embrace, protecting what was given to it, keeping it safe until the time of need. It was not magic, but it felt like magic. To place something into the cold ground and return moons later to find it changed, but still nourishing. That was a mystery they never questioned, only honored. Children learned of this art from their first winter. They followed their parents to the chambers, watching with wide eyes as the snow was brushed away, as the dark earth was opened. They learned the smell, the weight, the careful way the food was lifted and carried home. And each year they would help prepare the next hidden feast, their small hands learning the rituals that would one day save them too. To the tribe this practice was a quiet act of faith. It was faith in the earth's memory, in the way it could hold life safely even in the heart of death. It was faith in the wisdom of those who came before, who had discovered this secret and passed it down. And it was faith in themselves, in their ability to endure what others could not. When they ate the hidden feast, they did not eat in silence. They spoke softly to one another, telling stories of past winters, of how the ancestors had survived storms, even worse than this one. They spoke of the times when the sun returned and the rivers sang again. In those moments, the food became more than sustenance. It became connection to their past, to their future, to the land itself.
The hidden feast did more than keep their bodies alive. It kept their spirit alive. It reminded them that winter, for all its cruelty, was not the end. It was a season of waiting, of slowing down, of trusting the deep cycles of the world. It reminded them that even when the surface of life seemed still, there was always something moving quietly beneath, holding on, waiting to return. Now, if you stand in those lands where the snow still lies heavy and the wind still sighs through the trees, you may find no trace of those secret chambers. The tribe is gone, their halls buried beneath time and frost. But if you listen closely, you might feel it, the quiet wisdom of their survival, the faint echo of footsteps moving softly through the snow, carrying food from the depths of the earth. You might feel the memory of the hidden feast, sour and strange, but sacred. And you might understand that survival is not always strength or battle. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is knowing the earth so well that even its silence speaks to you. And sometimes it is simply trusting that what you placed in the ground will be there when you need it, waiting like a promise kept beneath the ice. Long ago, before the mountains were given names and before the forests had paths, there lived a people who learned to weave warmth from the cold itself. Their lands were buried beneath endless snow, where the wind bit like teeth, and the sky was little more than a pale shadow. To live there was to stand at the edge of the world. No fire burned long enough. No body was strong enough on its own. But the tribe endured, and they endured because they listened. They listened to the earth, to the animals who walked the tundra, to the silent wisdom of the frozen world. From that listening came their greatest secret, clothing not of mere cloth, but of the very bones of the cold. These garments were unlike any seen in the age of the Vikings. They were not simply sewn, they were crafted like living armor, fur layered upon fur, sinew stitched with care, and thin pieces of carved bone slipped between the hides to trap warmth, as if the coats themselves held a second skin. Each layer had meaning, each seam was made with purpose. They studied the creatures who roamed the frozen forests, the white fox, the great elk, the silent wolf. They watched how the snow slid off their coats,
how their breath never froze against their skin. The tribe did not simply kill and take, they copied nature's design, not to conquer it but to join it. To wear such a coat was to carry the spirit of the animal who had given its life. It was more than protection, it was a bond. They believed the warmth of the beast lingered in the hide, its strength and patience soaking into the wearer, like a quiet blessing. When a hunter put on his cloak of layered wolf fur, he did not feel alone in the storm. He felt the wolf walking beside him, guiding his step. When a mother wrapped her child in a coat lined with rabbit and fox, she whispered the name of the creature aloud, thanking it for its gift. In this way the tribe never forgot that survival came not from themselves alone, but from the world around them. The coats were heavy, but in their weight there was comfort. They hugged the body like a shield against the darkness. The bone pieces, carved so thin they were almost soft, worked like the ribs of a second body, holding heat close. The stitching was done with sinew, pulled tight in patterns passed down from elder to child. The women who sewed these garments worked in silence, their fingers numb but steady, their thoughts fixed on those who would wear them. Each stitch was a prayer that the one who wore it would return, a prayer that no storm would claim them. These coats were never thrown away, they were too precious, too full of memory. They were passed down through generations, becoming more than clothing. They became heirlooms, silent storytellers of the family who kept them. A tear in the sleeve spoke of a hunt that had gone wrong, but ended in survival. A stain in the fur whispered of a journey taken through blood and snow. To hold such a coat was to hold the history of all who had worn. When a child received their first garment, it often bore the marks of their ancestors, and in those marks was comfort. They knew they were not the first to face the cold. Others had stood in the same place, felt the same winds, and endured. Sometimes on nights when the storm howled so fiercely, it seemed the sky itself might break, the tribe would gather by the fire. They would wrap themselves in their coats and speak of the animals that had saved them. They spoke of the bear, whose thick fur taught them patience. They spoke of the deer, who could move lightly through the deepest snow. They spoke of the owl, whose feathers held warmth even in silence. Each story was a lesson. Each lesson was sewn into the next garment. The Vikings who heard of these coats thought them strange, even eerie. They could not imagine wearing bone as part of clothing, could not understand the quiet reverence in the tribe's craft. To them, fur was only fur, bone was only bone, but to the tribe, every piece carried life. Every scrap of hide was a gift to be treated with care. There were even rituals for the making of these garments. Before the sewing began, the women would sit in a circle, laying out the hides and bones beneath the dim light of the fire. They would hum softly, an old song that had no words, only notes that rose and fell like the breath of the earth. They believed that by singing they honored the creatures who had given their bodies. Only then, when the song was finished, would the first stitch be made. The coats also held something unseen. They held wisdom. They taught that survival was not about strength alone. It was about understanding, about paying attention to the smallest details, the quietest lessons. It was about looking at the fox and learning how it curled its tail for warmth. It was about seeing how snow drifted off the back of the elk, leaving it dry beneath. It was about realizing that the world itself offered answers, if only one was patient enough to look. When the children of the tribe grew old enough to walk in the snow on their own, they were given their first true coat. It was a moment of quiet ceremony. The elders would place the garment over the child's shoulders, speaking softly, "Now you carry not only yourself, but all who came before you." The child would stand straighter, feeling the weight, feeling the warmth. In that moment they became part of the long chain of survival, bound to the wisdom of the past. Even now, if you wander far into the frozen lands, you might find scraps of fur buried beneath the ice, pieces of bone smooth thin as paper, still holding the faint memory of hands that worked with care. If you hold them, you may feel it too, the quiet strength of a people who learned to weave life from death, warmth from cold, survival from understanding. And in that stillness, in that forgotten place, you may remember what they knew so well, that survival is not loud, it is not cruel, it is quiet, patient and humble. It is knowing that every stitch matters, that every layer of warmth carries a story, that even in the harshest cold, the earth leaves clues for those who listen. So the coats remain in memory, even when the tribe is gone. They are no longer worn, but their spirit lingers, like the soft breath of the animals who once gave them. and if you close your eyes you can almost feel their weight, their warmth, their whisper. A reminder that to endure is not to fight against the world, but to walk with it, to learn from it, and to carry its wisdom close, like a second skin. Long ago, in a world wrapped in endless winter, there was a silence so deep, it seemed to swallow the soul. The cold crept through walls and furs, through skin and bone, until even the strongest felt their breath grow thin. It was a silence that felt alive, as though it waited, patient and hungry. But in the heart of that silence, a sound would rise, soft at first, almost like a whisper, then growing steady, gentle and strong. It was the sound of voices, the sound of songs. The tribes sang even when their bodies weakened, even when the cold claimed their strength. Their voices moved slowly, like smoke rising from a fading fire. Low, deep tones hummed through the wooden halls, wrapping around the flames like a soft blanket. The songs were never loud. They did not try to fight the winter. They floated with it, moving like the drifting snow, calm and steady. To an outsider, these melodies might have seemed haunting, full of sorrow, but to the tribe they were a shield.
The songs held back the darkness that pressed against their walls. They were more than music. They were living prayers, threads of sound that bound their spirits to the earth. In those fragile moments, when breath came shallow and hunger gnawed at the soul, the songs reminded them they were still alive, still together. Each song was old, older than memory. No one knew who first sang them. The words were few, simple, shaped from the rhythm of the land itself. They spoke of snow falling softly over the mountains, of the sun hiding but not gone, of ancestors who once endured winters even longer than this one. They carried the weight of history, the quiet promise that nothing, no storm, no cold, was truly endless. The fire would flicker as they sang. Its glow would catch on tired faces, on the furs wrapped around their shoulders, on the small charms of bone and wood hanging near the walls. The hall felt different when the songs filled it, less empty, less cold. The sound traveled into the cracks, into the darkness, and it seemed for a moment as though the winter paused to listen. Even the children, too young to understand the meaning of every word, joined the song. Their small voices wove into the deeper ones, creating a fragile harmony that held the hall together. The elders said the children's voices were the strongest of all, for they carried the promise of life yet to come. When a child sang, it was as though the earth itself was reminded to be kind, to wait a little longer before taking anything away. Sometimes, when the cold was so sharp it stole the breath from their lips, the tribe would stop their work and simply sit near the fire, singing together. No one spoke between the lines. There was no need. The song was their language, their comfort, their connection. The sound filled the emptiness that hunger left behind. It was enough to keep despair away for another day. Outsiders, when they heard these songs, did not understand. They said the melodies sounded like mourning. They said the notes were heavy, strange, like voices calling from a place between life and death. But the tribe did not mourn when they sang. They remembered who they were, where they came from, and what it meant to endure. The elders taught that the songs kept death itself at bay. Death, they said, was like the winter, quiet, patient, creeping close, but it was also a listener. It stopped at the sound of music. It paused at the sound of a soul remembering its place in the world. So long as the voices rose together, death would not enter too soon. There were songs for every moment of the long winter, songs for lighting the fire at dusk, songs for tending it through the night, songs for the rare times when food was shared, and songs for the harder days when nothing was left but thin water and silence. There were songs to welcome the moonlight through the cracks in the wall, and songs to send the restless to sleep. Each one carried a different rhythm, but all moved slowly, softly, never rushed. The tribe believed the songs did more than protect the living. They also carried messages to the ancestors. When the melody rose, it was said to slip beyond the snow, beyond the clouds, into the place where the spirits waited. The ancestors would hear, and they would answer, not with words but with a quiet strength that settled in the chest like warmth. In this way the songs were more than sound. They were bridges between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, between the earth and the sky. They reminded the tribe that they were not alone, even in the coldest, darkest nights. Sometimes a single voice would begin a song, trembling and faint. Then another would join, and another, until the hall was filled with a single sound, rising and falling like the tide. In those moments no one felt weak, no one felt lost. They were one voice, one breath, one light. When the storm outside grew loud, when the wind howled through the trees like a beast searching for prey,
They sang louder, not in defiance, but in gentle resilience. Their voices did not fight the storm, they flowed with it, matching its rhythm, weaving into it, softening it. It was as if the storm itself grew tired of its rage and moved on, leaving the hall in peace. Even when someone was dying, even when the body could no longer hold on, the tribe would gather and sing. They believed the song guided the spirit on its way, showing it the path to join the ancestors. There was no fear in those final songs, only calm, only love. When the sun finally returned, pale and soft over the horizon, the tribe would sing again. This time the melody was lighter, though still it was a song of thanks, a song to honor the silence that had passed and the life that remained. It was the same song they had sung in the deepest cold, but now it felt different, like the promise had been kept. Now, if you travel to those frozen lands, where the wind still whispers through the empty forests, you may hear it faintly, not with your ears, but with something deeper, a soft hum in the air, a thread of melody that does not belong to this time. It lingers like a memory caught between snowflakes, and if you listen long enough, you may feel what they felt, that even in the greatest darkness, there is a way to hold on, that even when life feels fragile, a voice, a song can keep the soul connected to the earth. The songs of the tribe remain, not in words but in the quiet strength they left behind, a reminder that sometimes survival is not in the body, but in the spirit that refuses to let go. Long ago, before the names of seasons were spoken, there came a winter so deep, it seemed to have no end. It was not like the winters before, the ones the tribe had endured with patience and quiet strength. No, this one was different. The ice stretched farther than any living soul had seen. It spread over the forests, over the rivers, over the sea, until the world felt sealed in a frozen shadow. The winds, once only sharp, grew crueler. They carried a new edge that cut even through the thickest firs, a cold that reached into the heart and made it tremble. The sun did not return when it was meant to. Days passed, then weeks, and still the horizon held only a pale glow that never brightened. The tribe watched the sky with silent hope, waiting for the first soft light of dawn. But dawn never came. The world stayed dim and grey, locked in an endless twilight that blurred the hours together. Time itself seemed to falter, stretching thin like ice over a black lake. At first they trusted in their ways. They went to the hidden chambers beneath the earth, where the food of past seasons was kept safe. They uncovered the secret feasts that had saved them through so many long nights before. But this time the smell was wrong. The fish that had once been rich and sour with life had turned foul. The roots, normally bitter but strong, had become soft and spoiled. Even the earth seemed unwilling to give them help. The hunters tried to bring back meat from the forests, but the animals had vanished. Not even the smallest track could be found. The sea was frozen solid, its voice silenced beneath a lid of ice, so thick no blade could cut through. The winds grew louder, howling like lost spirits. They slipped through every crack in the wooden walls, stealing what warmth remained. The old ones began to whisper of the mountain's spirit. They said it had turned its face away. Perhaps the spirit was tired of watching humans cling to the edge of its cold domain. Perhaps this was the final test of their existence, the last trial before the mountain decided whether they were worthy to remain. No one spoke of defiance. There was no anger, no bitterness, only quiet acceptance, the same way they had accepted every storm before. But there was fear too, soft and heavy, lingering in their eyes like a shadow they could not speak aloud. One by one, families gathered what they had left. They wrapped themselves in every layer of fur and bone. They took the few belongings that still meant something, a charm carved by an ancestor, a small bone flute, a scrap of hide with patterns sewn by a mother long gone. They left the halls they had built with such care. They left the fires that had burned for generations. They did not walk into the forests. They did not walk toward the mountains. Instead they walked down. There were caves hidden deep beneath the earth, places the tribe had always known but rarely used. They were older than memory, hollow chambers carved by time itself, where the air was still and heavy, and the walls glistened with frozen veins of ice. It was said these caves were closer to the spirit of the mountain, closer to the heart of the earth. Some believed the ancestors slept there, waiting for the day the tribe would join them.
So they descended, quietly, slowly. They lit no torches, for there was little fuel left. The only light came from the faint shimmer of ice reflecting what little glow remained from the sky above. As they entered the caves, the wind outside grew faint, muffled by stone. The world became hushed, almost peaceful, as if the mountain had swallowed their sound. For months, no smoke rose from their halls. No footprints marked the snow,
The forest stood empty. The great stones carved with runes watched over a silent settlement with no voices left to honor them. From this winter onward, no outsider ever saw them again. The halls remained, but they were hollow, cold, their walls creaking softly in the wind like they were whispering to themselves. What happened to the tribe beneath the earth? No one knows. Perhaps they found a deeper stillness there, a kind of rest that was neither life nor death. Perhaps they joined the mountain spirit, becoming part of the frost and the stone. Or perhaps they simply waited in the dark until time forgot them. But there are those who say that the caves still hold their breath, that if you venture far enough into the frozen north, past the forests and the silent rivers, you may find the entrance to those hidden chambers. And if you listen closely at the mouth of the cave, you might hear something faint, not words, not even song, but a soft hum, like the echo of voices that have passed beyond the world yet remain somehow near. The outsiders, the ones who travelled north long after, told strange stories. They said the halls of the tribe were found, still standing, with the fire pits cold but untouched. The great stones still stood, their runes sharp against the snow, but there were no bodies, no sign of struggle. It was as if the people had simply walked away. Some say they became part of the mountain, their spirits woven into the ice itself. Others believe they still live, deep below, in a place where the cold cannot reach, and the darkness is gentle, a place where the mountain spirit finally welcomed them home. What is known is that from that winter onward, the tribe was never seen again. Their memory lingered only in whispers. The songs they once sang fell silent, but the echo of their resilience remained. The hidden feasts, the warm coats of bone and fur, the firelight against the void, these became stories told around other fires, far away, by people who never truly understood what it meant to live in a world where even the sun could not endure. And still, when the wind rises in those empty lands, it carries a strange stillness. It feels heavy, but not cruel. It feels as though something is there watching, remembering. The mountain spirit, perhaps keeping the last trace of the tribe's set. So if you ever find yourself far in the north, standing in a place where the snow never ends, and the sky is silent, you may feel it too, a sense that the people who lived there did not simply vanish, that they slipped into another rhythm, one too slow and quiet for the rest of the world to hear. And in that feeling, there is no fear, only calm, only the soft knowing that even in the harshest winters, there is always a place where life endures, waiting, beyond the reach of time. Long ago, before the maps of men reached the farthest edges of the frozen world, there was a forest that whispered with secrets. It was a place where the trees stood close together, their black branches heavy with snow, where the ground was soft and silent, beneath endless drifts of water. And at the heart of this forest stood the remains of a forgotten tribe. When the Viking explorers came, they found only silence, no voices, no movement, no smoke curling from the roof. The great stones still stood where the tribe had raised them, their runes sharp and clear against the frost, but they watched over nothing. The huts lay half buried in snow, their doors hanging open as if waiting for someone to return. The fire pits were cold, filled only with ash that had long since lost its warmth. There were no bodies, no tracks, no sign of struggle or flight. It was as though the people had simply stopped. The explorers walked through the settlement with heavy steps, their breath misting in the pale air. They touched the walls of the huts, but the wood was brittle, hollow, like the bones of something long dead. They stepped carefully around the stones, feeling a strange weight in the air, a stillness that pressed against their ears. Some tried to speak, but their voices felt too loud in that empty place, like they did not belong. The forest surrounding the settlement seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was quiet there, as though it had been warned not to disturb the silence. And yet faint trails remained, paths that wound between the trees, leading deeper into the white wilderness. The explorers followed them for a time, hoping they might find the tribe beyond the forest's edge. But each trail ended in the same way. No footprints, no camps, only more snow, only more silence. At night, when the explorers made camp, they would speak of strange things. They said that when the wind rose, it carried more than the sound of the trees. It carried faint chanting, distant and soft, like voices humming from a place just beyond. The sound would come and go, rising gently, then fading into the stillness again. Some said they dreamed of it too, dreams of people in heavy furs walking between the trees, their faces pale and calm, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Always, in these dreams, The people said nothing. They only looked at the explorers with an expression that was neither sorrow nor joy, as if they were no longer bound to the world of men. One explorer, a man older than the rest, believed the tribe had not vanished, but had slipped into another realm. He spoke quietly, his voice trembling like the flames of their campfire. He said the tribe had crossed a threshold, gone beyond the reach of time and cold. They had walked into the shadow of the mountain spirit they once honored, and had been taken into its eternal embrace. Not dead, not alive, but elsewhere, beyond. The others laughed at first, but as the days passed, the laughter faded. The emptiness of the forest seemed too deep, too deliberate. It was not the emptiness of ruin or decay, but of something unfinished, as if the people still lingered there, unseen, just out of sight. The explorers began to move more carefully. They spoke less. Even the bravest among them began to glance over their shoulders as they walked the silent path. When they finally left the forest and returned to their ships, they did not speak of the place with certainty. They called it cursed, but not in anger. It was not the curse of wrath, but of mystery. A curse that was quiet and heavy, the kind that made you feel small, the kind that reminded you there were things in the world that could not be explained. The story of the vanished tribe spread slowly. It became a whisper told in halls far from the frozen land. Men spoke of it over firelight in the long winter nights, saying the tribe had been claimed by the gods of the cold. Some said they had angered the mountain spirit and been erased. Others said they had found a hidden path into the underworld, and chosen to walk it together. No one agreed, but no one doubted the story either. The explorers had seen it with their own eyes, a settlement untouched by time, yet emptied of life.
Years later, other travelers tried to find the place, but the forest always shifted. The trails changed, the snow buried old paths and carved new ones. Some returned, saying the land itself moved to keep its secrets. Others never returned at all, and so the memory of the tribe became more than a tale. It became a myth that haunted the edges of the known world. Even now, it is said that if you stand in those forests on a still night, you may feel it, the quiet weight of the air, the sense that you are being watched, though no one is there. If the wind rises, you may hear faint voices in the distance, soft as breath, weaving together in a melody you cannot name. And if you close your eyes, you may see them, figures moving slowly between the trees, their faces calm, their steps silent. They do not come closer, they do not speak, they only linger, as if waiting for something unseen. What they wait for, no one knows. Perhaps they wait for the mountain spirit to call them again. Perhaps they wait for someone who can finally understand the choice they make. Or perhaps they simply remain, echoes of a people who lived too close to the silence of the world, and finally became part of it. The Vikings called that forest the place beyond the living. They did not enter it again. They said it was not for men, not anymore. It belonged to the tribe, and to whatever realm they had passed into. And so it was left alone, its secrets kept safe beneath layers of snow and time. Now, when the night is long and the wind is cold, people still tell the story. They speak of the great stones, with their silent runes, the huts half buried in white, the faint trails leading to nowhere. They speak of the distant chanting that rises and fades, as if the tribe had never truly vanished, but had only stepped beyond the reach of mortal eye. And in the telling there is no fear, only wonder, only the soft knowing that there are places in this world that cannot be explained, only felt. Places where silence is not empty, but full of memory, where absence is not loss but a passage into something deep. So if you ever wander into the far north, and the forest grows too quiet, listen. You may hear them still, the voices of the tribe, singing from beyond the veil of snow, not gone, not lost, only waiting in the stillness, forever part of the land they once called home. Long ago, before the names of kings were written, and before the seas were fully known, there was a people who lived with the frost as their constant companion. Their story has nearly vanished, carried away by the slow turning of time. What remains is scattered, faint, like echoes heard from far away. A single bone carving rests in a quiet museum, its surface smoothed by hands long gone. A stone half buried in snow still holds a rune no one can fully read. These are the last traces of a tribe that once endured the endless winters of the far north. And yet, even though the world has forgotten their faces and their names, their spirit lingers. It lingers in the hush of falling snow, in the stillness of forests that hold more silence than sound. It lingers in the quiet resilience of people who still live close to the ice, who still know that life is not only about strength, but about patience, memory, and hope.
When you walk across the frozen lands they once called home, you can almost feel them, not as ghosts, but as something softer, something more like a breath held in the air. The wind seems to move differently there, as if it is careful not to disturb what remains. The sky feels heavier, yet calm, like it remembered. The earth beneath your feet carries a quiet weight, a sense that you are walking not just on land but on layers of history that have been sleeping for centuries. There is a stone circle in the heart of that land, where the tribe once carved their story. The carvings are faint now, dulled by frost, but they are still there. Spirals, lines, shapes of animals no one alive has ever seen. Scholars have tried to read them, but the meaning slips through their fingers like snowflakes melting on the skin. Still, when you stand before those stones, you do not need to read the runes to understand. You can feel what they hold. Love, survival, a promise that even in the darkest cold, life was tended like a fragile flame. The bone carving in the museum is small, simple, and unremarkable to most. But if you look closely, you can see the marks of careful hands. A figure etched in tiny strokes, half human, half something older. It is said to be the mountain spirit the tribe once honored, the one they believed shaped the storms and watched over their fate. The carving holds no power now, at least none that can be measured, but it still carries the memory of those who believed in it. It reminds us that survival was never about brute strength alone. It was about understanding the world deeply enough to live in harmony with it. Even now, the people who live near the ice remember bits of the old ways. They may not know where the songs came from, but they still hum them softly on long winter nights. They may not speak the tribe's name, but they still leave offerings of simple things: bread, berries, a carved charm at the edge of the forest before the first heavy snow. These are rituals that have outlived the memory of their origin. They are small acts, but they keep a connection alive, a thread stretching across the centuries. When the snow falls silently over those old lands, it feels as though the tribe is still there, unseen but present. You cannot see them with your eyes, but you can feel the shape of their life. In the way the cold settles, in the way the trees lean inward like they are listening, it is as if they remain beneath the frost, guarding their secrets quietly, patiently, without needing to be known. Travelers who go too far north speak of strange moments, of hearing soft voices carried on the wind when no one is near, of seeing faint trails in the snow that lead nowhere, of feeling watched, not with malice, but with a calm presence, like the land itself is aware of their steps. Some come back saying they dreamed of the tribe, dreams of firelit halls, of layered furs, stitched with bone, of songs that rose like mist in the quiet. In these dreams the tribe is not sorrowful or lost. They are simply there, living in a rhythm that no longer belongs to this world. Their legend has become a whisper at the edge of memory, not a tale of glory or conquest, but of quiet endurance. It reminds those who hear it that survival is not loud. It is not the clash of weapons or the power of kings. It is the soft strength of people who listen to the earth, who learn from the animals, who honor the cycles of darkness and light. It is the kind of strength that asks for nothing but the will to keep breathing, to keep hoping, to keep tending the small flame of life even when the world feels frozen and empty. When you listen to the wind in the far north, it does not speak in words, but it carries a feeling that the past is not entirely gone, that somewhere in the snow and ice, something still remembers. The tribe's huts may have fallen, their fires long cold, but the essence of what they were remains, woven into the land itself. It is in the shadows of the mountains, in the hush of the frozen rivers, in the endless stars that light the longest nights. And so, though they vanished from sight, they were never truly lost. They became part of the frost, part of the winter winds, part of the silence that holds the world together. Their secrets lie beneath the eternal snow, guarded not by walls or weapons, but by time itself, and perhaps that is how they wished it, to fade not into nothingness, but into something greater, to become the breath of the cold, the hum of the forest, the soft song that lingers after the last human voice has fallen quiet. Even now, long after their names have been forgotten, the tribe lives on in every story told by the fire on winter nights, in every soft step taken on the snow-covered earth, in every quiet act of care that helps life endure. Their legend remains, not as a warning or a mystery to be solved, but as a gentle reminder, a reminder that strength is not always loud, that hope can live in silence, that survival is as much about memory as it is about flesh, and that some things, though hidden, never truly vanish. They stay with us, like whispers carried endlessly by the winter winds, soft and eternal, echoing across the frost-bound world.